Welcome back. One of my biggest concerns in running a conference is things like wayfinding, is things like timekeeping. So I really thank you for being here and for finding your way to your next session as we go on. I'll do some housekeeping and some notes after this next session, but I am really excited. When we found that we had confirmed this next 30-minute fireside chat, I was in awe. And when we sat on Zoom with these two women planning what they were going to talk about, I think I wasn't the only person who was quite literally brought to tears with some of the courageous conversations that are going to be had. Y-Vonne Hutchinson is the founder and CEO of ReadySet, a diversity and inclusion consultancy based here in Oakland. Carine Kanimba is an international human rights activist and the daughter of Paul Rusesabagina, if I'm saying that correctly, who was featured in the movie Hotel Rwanda. They're going to have what I know to be just a profound conversation about hope, about challenge, and about the roles that each of us can play in our daily lives against and alongside the things that are happening on a global scale. So when I think of what does it mean to act locally and think globally, what does it mean to be impacted personally by the circumstances of the world, but not lose hope? These are the conversations that I'm excited to showcase and excited for you all to share. So please welcome up on stage Y-Vonne Hutchinson and Carine Kanimba.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. So no pressure. Hopefully we won't move you to tears here. But hopefully we can also, share our experiences and give you something to think about. So you want to go ahead and get started? Okay. So I think we already heard the short bios, but Carine, I'm curious, can you just go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your story and where you are now?
Yes, can you guys hear me? Is this working? First, it's a pleasure. Louder? Can you hear me now? Okay. So first, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and thank you, Robin, for the invitation, and honored to be speaking next to Y-Vonne. So just as a brief introduction, my name is Carine Kanimba. I was born in Rwanda. It's a small country in East Africa, and I was born just 1 year before the Rwandan genocide. In 1994, there was a huge genocide that killed almost 1 million people in my country. And at the time, if you've heard of the movie Hotel Rwanda, my father, Paul Rusesabagina, saved 1,268 people in his hotel by sheltering and by protecting them, risking his own life every day in order to ensure that none of the militias who were waiting outside would enter to kill the refugees who were hidden inside. In 2004, the movie was released, and my father became known across the world for his role, for his bravery. At the time, I was also a baby, and both my biological parents were unfortunately killed during the genocide. They were both Tutsi. And so I was privileged and lucky to be adopted by Paul Rusesabagina, the men in the movie. And if you remember, if you watch the movie, you'll see at the really end, those two little girls that he finds and adopts, and essentially my sister and I, that he took on and raised as his own. And so fast forward about now 20, almost 30 years from now, a lot of things have happened in our lives, and a lot of other challenges have tested us, our humanity, our faith, our belief. And that includes 2020, when my father was kidnapped by the current regime in Rwanda, taken to Kigali, imprisoned, tortured, and jailed. And so at that time, I myself was tested as well. And I had to stop everything I was doing and advocate for his release and the release of other political prisoners in Rwanda. So this is a very fast version to tell you, to just introduce myself briefly, and I'm excited by the conversation we're going to have today. But I'd love to hear you, Y-Vonne, and your background.
Yeah, that's such a compelling story. My background's a little bit different. I was born and raised in Texas, and prior to starting Ready Set, I was an international human rights lawyer. So stories like yours, Carine, are what was the inspiration for my career. And I spent time in Afghanistan, Thailand on the border with Burma, Nicaragua, working with people who were dealing with war, acute humanitarian and human rights emergencies. And it was in my last role where I was working with sugarcane workers in Nicaragua who were dying of occupational disease in the sugarcane fields that I really started to think about the nature of violence in our lives, and not just I hesitate to say exceptional violence of war, because war is not exceptional, but structural violence as well. And particularly violence as it intersects with work, and the issues and challenges that we face in the workplace. That motivated me to start thinking about the future of work, start thinking about questions like international and domestic labor protections, and ultimately to start working with Ready Set, because at the time, we were seeing a lot of movement in the world of work, particularly here, Silicon Valley, workplace cultures, and there was, I think, quite a few questions around who got access to high opportunity employment, how people were being treated at work, and the kind of impacts that organizations have on the world around them, particularly when they're not diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And that was back in 2015, and I think those questions are even more salient today, and we've sort of seen how workplace exclusion has played out in broader society at large. So that's what brings me here to this conversation, and I'm just so excited to sit here with you, Carine, and talk about your experience. And if it's okay, I would like to jump in with a question right now. So when your father was arrested and they told you he's never coming home, can you talk a little bit about that experience, what it was like trying to get him back and what you felt?
Yes, so I'd like to just to make one small correction. He wasn't arrested. He was kidnapped and then taken in wrongfully and detained unjustly, essentially as a wrongful detainee of the Rwandan government. And one of the reasons that happened is because he used his platform, the platform that Hotel Rwanda gave him, to speak about the human rights of the people in the Great Lakes region of Africa, to speak on democracy, on justice, on the rule of law. And so he would go around the world, traveling to different conferences, universities, parliaments, and talk about the need for accountability, the need for legislation that holds leaders accountable for their actions. And so by doing so, and of course the recognition of Hotel Rwanda, the current regime in Rwanda got very angry, jealous. They first started to try to recruit him. He refused to work for the regime. They tried to kill him. They were unsuccessful. And so in the end, they successfully kidnapped him and brought him to Rwanda. And so given the conditions of a dictatorship and how dictatorships operate, a lot of people believe that the current dictator would never let him go. They told us, just give up. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you advocating? And by advocating, I meant going to everywhere around the world where he used to speak and really talking about what had happened and what happened to others like him. And so I had to have faith. I had to believe that truth will prevail, that people will be decent enough to realize that the injustice that was happening and that leaders will start making decisions that would lead to consequences for the people who were responsible for his kidnapping and torture. And by doing so, I myself had to literally address every person around the world that could give me their attention. It could be a company in New York City, and I told them, what can you do? You have a role to play in the fight for justice and human rights and democracy. It could be a school of students, students in high school and college who also had a role to play. It could be the media and their role in sharing these types of stories. So literally had to think outside of the box. Every person that I spoke to, how your role, what you can do in order to help and support people like my father and others who are in this condition. And so it really just took a lot of belief, hope, persistence, at the cost of my own security and my own safety. When the regime then turned its eyes on me and started, they put a spyware in my phone. We're listening to every conversation I was having with leaders around the world, with individuals around the world, and trying to get ahead of our actions. We mobilized the Hollywood community who were involved in the movie of Hotel Rwanda by having them wear a T-shirt. All the actors wore a T-shirt calling for my father's release, and that angered the regime. So then they started going after me. So it's a constant putting aside all the negatives. It was remembering what our end goal is, and our end goal is not only to bring my father home, was to bring my father home, and as well as get people to understand that every single one of them have something they can do, whether it's a tweet, whether it's a message, whether it's writing to representatives. There's a lot of things, and so it just became about that, finding that routine.
Yeah. It sounds like it took a lot of courage for you to spearhead that movement. And I'm curious, was there a particularly scary moment in your quest to bring your father home? How did you handle that?
Yeah, so I mean, the whole time it was very scary, just because every day my father was in prison, we were receiving messages that that they were hurting him, that they were physically torturing him. So it was, how do you remove the reality from your mind in order to continue the task in question, which is to get people to act and make decisions and pressure that would lead to his release. And so I think the constant knowledge that of the conditions that he was held on was scary throughout. Just to tell you, in the end, he was released after 2.5 years. I forgot to mention this earlier. He's no longer in prison. We were successful in having him freed, and that's because of the support of many people around the world who stood up and said something or did something. And so this is kind of what my work has become now. It's been supporting other families who are in conditions like mine, who are in different countries around the world. It's about advocating for democracy, for human rights, all these individuals and countries and companies that are violating these core principles that we all cherish, that we all wish to live by, and holding them to account. And so I know this is the kind of work that you're doing a lot as well.
Yeah, and I just have one more question, which is, as all of this has gone on, and congratulations on getting your father out. That's a huge accomplishment. But as you were engaged in that struggle, you also had a life to lead. You were, you were pursuing your own professional goals. And I'm curious, how do you show up every day despite that and keep taking action? How do you keep that perseverance?
Well, thank you for that question. So I at the time when I first learned of his kidnapping, I worked in finance in New York City and for an impact investing firm, and I could not go back to working on my clients' portfolios. I could no longer focus on that aspect of my life. It became about, how can I make sure that my father is alive tomorrow? How can I make sure that I see him again? And so my social life ended at that moment. My entire I put myself aside because at that point I was fine, I was breathing, but my father, I didn't know if he was. And so the knowledge that every day that passes, that it could mean that I no longer see him again. And in doing so, I met so many others like me. I met so many other families. I mean, you may have heard of Vladimir Karamurza, who was detained in Russia and who was just released this past month. His wife was advocating every single day for his release, going from parliament to media to school to anywhere, anyone who can listen to her. And so when we see other people like this, we realize we're not alone. And what happens at the end of the day is that if we do not speak up, once we see injustice, if I did not speak up on behalf of my father, if she did not speak up on behalf of her husband, and if you do not speak up when you see something wrong going on, it might happen to you as well. I never imagined that my father would ever be kidnapped and tortured, and yet he did. And so it gave me the realization that it can come to you as well. It can happen to you, and what can you do? What will you do and is to stand up and to keep going.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's amazing.
But I'm curious about you as well, and your work, especially in this contentious environment, where how do you advise the leaders that you're speaking with, and especially ahead of this political season we are in, and the elections coming up?
Yes, I think. I want to first acknowledge my privilege a little bit, because I occupy such a different position, and that is one of an advocate and an advisor. And so that does afford me, a little bit of distance, but there is, I think, still quite a bit of fear and risk that leaders and organizations are feeling right now. And, we are dealing with compounding issues. I think we're going to talk about this in a second. There's sort of the very real threats of authoritarianism, in the US and what that means for us. There's political instability. There's global conflict in Russia, conflict in the Middle East and Palestine and Lebanon and Israel. There's, conflict in Taiwan as well, or the potential for conflict. So there's just incredible global instability. And there's also the fact that we are still going through, a pandemic, which is affecting our workforce, affecting productivity, affecting how people are able to show up and take care of themselves. And so I think as a leader, it's really scary to sort of navigate these compounding crises. There's also the climate crisis, which, we don't forget, but, it's something that unfortunately, I think we're acclimating to. But there's the climate crisis too, which affects, I have employees who can't get electricity because they've just been hit by a hurricane, And I think as leaders, we're told to sort of stay apolitical, to stay out of it, to not take a stance. But as we're thinking about how we support employees, we do have to be guided by something, and figuring out how to really lean into our values consistently throughout these multiple crises is something that I advise people on, because I think, like it or not, all of these things have been really politicized. And I think politicized in an effort to sort of shut down the discourse and to discourage us from taking action. And we have to be smart as leaders. I think we have to be mindful of the organizations we're speaking on behalf of. We have to be mindful of ourselves. But, I think it is important that we lead, with our values as people look to us to figure out how they navigate these compounding crises that are in our world and that are inescapable. They don't disappear just because you log on to your computer and you go on Slack. You know what I mean? It's still there. The world is still there, and certain people are particularly vulnerable. And so when I'm counseling leaders, I encourage them to really articulate what those values are for themselves and to think through how they consistently apply them, and then to also be ready for pressure and backlash. Because sadly, that happens too. I early on, and I share the story, and I hope that I don't offend anyone, but, early on after October 7th, I published post, and I expressed deep sympathies with what was happening for the people who survived the terrorist attack in Israel and the victims. And I also expressed sympathies for people in Gaza. And I was attacked. My family was threatened. My business was threatened. It was terrifying. It lasted for months and months. And that's the reality that we face as leaders today. And, it's up to us to figure out how we navigate it. But I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that that is the current environment. I do think the more of us that speak out, the more powerful we are, but it comes with its risks. So I said a lot there, so I'll say that, and then I'll answer your second question and stop talking, turn it back over to you. I think the second question about sort of thinking about the upcoming election and what it means. I think running a DEI company, I don't know if you all have heard, it's a little bit more difficult than it was in 2020. And, you know, in our space, we're navigating quite a bit of backlash. But I'm going to say that something that I think some people will disagree with. I think that backlash is going to happen whether or not there's a Republican or a Democrat in office. I think the risks to democracy exists outside of one particular political candidate. But I think we as business leaders, and I talk about this outside of the context of DEI too, we need to be mindful about what that means for the people who work for us. So how we talk to people about the upcoming elections, how we reinforce our values as they relate to communication, they relate to exclusion, they relate to bias that doesn't go away because it's a political conversation, right? And upholding those values doesn't mean you're choosing one political candidate or another. How we're being mindful of misinformation. So we know that employees are going to talk about the election at work. Something like 75% of employees talked about 2020. That number is likely higher now. And there's a very high risk that employees are going to share misinformation. It was high risk in 2020. It's worse now. Deepfakes are much better now. Misinformation is much more prominent now on whatever platform you're going on. And AI has just become increasingly more influential. And so being mindful of the spaces where employees have those conversations, because they're having them on Slack, they're having them in person, and really proactively giving them the tools to navigate misinformation, regardless of whatever political candidate you support, I think is important as well. So I try to give folks those tools. Personally, you know, we're planning for, you know, the non-optimal outcome and thinking through ways that we protect our firm. But I think regardless of what happens, we should be equipping employees with the tools to talk to each other and to not turn what is already a polarized and divisive political climate into one that's even more unsafe in the workplace. So I'm going to stop talking with that because I want to turn it back to you and talk a little bit about your experience and what you've brought now to your career. And I just want to say, what have you learned from your experience with your father, and how have you applied that to your day-to-day life?
Yeah, so I now work for the World Liberty Congress, and it's an organization that brings pro-democracy activists, leaders, human rights lawyers, and different organizations to advance the principles of democracy, of justice, and human rights. And there are a lot of things that we deal with on a daily basis that we get to share with each other in the community. But the most important part of it is that there's a lot of strength in collaboration. Oftentimes, we're fighting authoritarian regimes. This is our work, is to stand up to authoritarian regimes, and we know that these authoritarian regimes are also working together, whether it be China, Russia, Venezuela. And so when we bring these activists together in order to also work together, it helps us get closer to the goal. And one thing, an important lesson that I'd say I've learned, and just to point out the climate of which the world we're living in today, is that for example, free and fair trade relies on a rule-based system, on the independence of the judiciary, on the transparency of governance. And so when these principles are weakened, when these institutions are weakened, you cannot function in the way that we'd hope our industries, our communities to function. And so every one of us is somehow has a responsibility. We all share this responsibility to advance these principles because it gets back to us as well, and not only in the form of advocacy, but also in really using our unique platforms and our skills in order to point out those issues, to expose those issues, and to find solutions for all of it, whatever industries we come from. And so I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that we all have a part to play.
Yeah. You said something really interesting to me in the green room, and I don't mean to surprise you with a question that's not on the laptop screen. I'm going to. You talked a little bit about just discouraging people from thinking it's happening over there and it can't happen here. And I was just wondering if you wanted to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, for example, now I've been talking about Rwanda, and it's a small country in East Africa. It seems far, far away from us. I can talk about the other countries we work with in my organization, and we may think that it's so far away, but whatever happens there happens to us as well. Injustice anywhere, as many of you have heard, is injustice everywhere. And so we may not feel necessarily related, targeted, or even feel the consequences of the erosion of democracy across the globe, but we feel it right at home. Mm-hmm. And we've seen this over the past few years in the United States, and it's been seen now globally. And so again, we all have a part to play.
Yeah, I would add to that too by saying increasingly our organizations are more and more global, and we lead more and more global lives. So the sort of distance that we may be used to is fading away. And I think more and more the workplace has become a battleground. You know, when people want to get at you, they attack your livelihood. And I think we're seeing the way that our work and our jobs are being weaponized as we sort of confront these global issues. So I think it's really important for us to remind ourselves of that fact. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, no, and what message would you have for our audience?
Yeah, I came in here really wanting us to I think to take away and to offer the message of courageous leadership. I just feel like now, and I don't mean to be all doom and gloom. I'm not. My husband would say probably a little bit too rainbows and puppy dogs. I'm a perennial optimist, but I do think now is the time for us to lead courageously, and however we think about doing that. And then we don't have to be managers or CEOs to do that. I think there are a lot of people who are in leadership positions here, and there are a lot of people who are, our teams are looking to us in our organizations for guidance. And I think that, it's hard to lead with courage, but I think it's possible. And even on an individual level, I think we can model, our values for others. And that still really matters in the workplace, especially now. I think so many people suffer in silence. So many people don't talk about what they're experiencing. So many people have learned, I think, over the past few years to make their kind of suffering invisible until it explodes. And I think creating the space where people can be vulnerable and people can talk about those things is still really important. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to take a particular stance. It just means that you have to lead with your values, even when it's hard, even when those values are under attack, even when people say, make exceptions for the values. I would just say, identify what they are, know what they are, use them consistently, and always be mindful where they might not be there, where somebody is pushing you to make that exception. And I think that, we like to think of business as being apolitical, but it's been politicized. And we all have a role to play to what Carine is saying. And so I would just encourage us to be brave and courageous as we play that role. I think in this room, there are other people who probably align with your values too, and to find that network of leaders and find that support system so that you don't feel alone while you're doing that courageous leadership. So yes, that's what I would ask that you take away from that.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, we've gotten the sign to end, so we're gonna end. And just thank you so much for coming to the session.
Thank you, Y-Vonne. Thank you, Carine. And thank you all for being here. We're gonna go to lunch, but before we do, we have a couple of housekeeping items and a little bit of context for the afternoon. So before I introduce what we're going to have in the afternoon, which is a session, an incredible session, and also small group breakouts as part of that, I wanted to share the reason that we curate a small group breakout, which is an hour of each day into an already busy conference, because honestly, I've never been to an event where I'm excited to meet fellow attendees and not wanted more time to interact with fellow attendees. I'm guessing that most of you can relate to that, maybe even already today with like, but there's too many sessions and there's too many people I want to meet. When I started Responsive Conference, I started as a community member. In 2015, I read the manifesto, which is responsive.org/manifesto. And I asked the founders behind Responsive what I could do to help. And one of them said, oh, you should run an unconference. And like a naive event organizer, I said, great, I'll go do that. What's an unconference? And they said, well, put on an event curated by the people who show up that day. And so we put on an event in downtown San Francisco in 2016, and I invited all my friends, and they invited some of theirs, and we were expecting 20 people to show up. Free event, day before Valentine's Day, February, rainy, cold Saturday. Saturday in downtown San Francisco. It's like not an event you want to go to. We had 250 people show up that day. And the entirety of the event, all of the agenda, there were no speakers. It was just the people who show up set the agenda. And so even after I then started Responsive Conference and we've put together what is just an incredible agenda and array of speakers for you, we wanted to carve out time for you to engage with your fellow attendees. So I'm going to bring up my colleague Milan, and Milan's going to give a little bit of context to how small groups today and tomorrow are going to work.
Awesome. I have a clicker here. Hello, everyone. My name is Milan Lee. I'm going to juggle multiple devices. So excited to be here and to see you all in person. It's been such an amazing morning so far. We're only halfway. The caliber of this group of the speakers. Can't wait to see what's next. So it's not just about the speakers, right? Although they are brilliant. This is about you and what you create here, the ideas, the energy, the conversations you have. And so that's what, as Robin said, these small groups are going to be about. So at the heart of this experience is the small groups. We're going to dive deeper into it more tomorrow, but I want to introduce your small groups today. So if you notice on your name tags, you've got a little colored dot. If you have a red dot, would you mind raising your hand and keeping it up? And look around. Basically, that's your group, right? Lock eyes, make it awkward. These little dots are your invitation. They're just symbols for connections yet to be made. And those are the connections we're going to have actually in the next session when you come back from lunch. So here's some instructions. Actually, let's demonstrate. Steven, where are you at? There he is. Look at that. So when you come back into the room, you're going to find your facilitator. And I should have done this earlier. There we go. Here are hand-picked facilitators. They are wonderful people, experts in their field. And I've spent time with them leading up to this event, preparing for it, and they are incredibly devoted and committed to making your small group experience impactful and meaningful. So when you come back from lunch, it's going to be in the talk by Dr. Carol Robbins, going to be in this room, and you're going to look for your small group facilitator. Here we go. There we go. And there are their color assignments, so you're just going to match. I feel like I'm holding a Starbucks drink or something, and this is not fancy. You're going to find your group. They're going to be waving their flags, and they'll be directing you to the rows that you're in during that interactive workshop. Yeah? So let's see. Think of your facilitators as your home base throughout the 2 days that we're here together. And think of these dots and flags, again, as just an invitation, just symbols of ways to connect. You can connect over lunch. They're going to be available with their flags as well. If you just want a place to land, they are more than welcome. You're more than welcome to meet with them. And again, tomorrow we'll dive deeper with our small groups. So lean into your small groups. We're building a community here, and it starts with you. Thank you. Here's some more logistics from Robin.
All right. Thank you, Milan, and our facilitators. We're going to lunch. Couple of notes. Lunch is going to be in the garden, which is the same place when you go out of the JMT, turn right. There was coffee this morning. There's going to be live music out there, as you might have seen this morning. McGilvery Allen is going to be joining us across the 2 days. There are puppies to cuddle alongside sponsorship booths. The puppies are there for you to cuddle. There's nobody selling you anything alongside the puppies. We just decided that what would make a conference at the Oakland Museum of California better? Puppies. So They're going to be here from 12:30 to 2:30 and 3 to 5 both days. So enjoy that. And finally, something like 10 of our speakers and small group facilitators have published books. So we got a local Oakland bookstore to sell their books. That is just on the left side as you go out of the JMT. So if you are interested in your speakers, you might check out their books as well. With that, I'll send you to lunch. Thank you all very much for being here, and I'll see you back here in 1 hour. If you can please come back promptly at 1:40, we'll start then.